I'm Grace Miller, 30 years old, a single mother, and I've learned the hard way that in my family, love always came with conditions. Achievements were displayed like trophies, failures whispered about over crystal glasses, and somehow, I was always the failure. My cousins were praised, my siblings celebrated, while I became the shadow they compared everyone else against. The night I gave birth to my daughter Lily, Ethan walked out saying I'd never make it without him. My family didn't comfort me, they agreed. That was the moment I understood. In this house, I wasn't just unloved, I was unwanted. Ever been told you're useless by the people who should have protected you? Hit like if your family ever made you feel small, and comment if you know what it's like to be erased in your own story. All those memories flooded back the moment I stepped through the Miller Mansion door on Thanksgiving night, Lily's small hand gripping mine a little tighter than usual. That suffocating heaviness, familiar and unwelcome, pressed against my chest like a weight I had carried since childhood. I smiled anyway, because Lily deserved warmth on Thanksgiving, even if it came only from me. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pies filled the halls, but it wasn't comfort I felt. It was memory. The polished oak floors had known my footsteps since I was a girl, but they carried echoes of whispered judgments, of eyes darting at me across holiday tables, tallying my shortcomings against the shining achievements of cousins and siblings. I remembered Christmases where a misplaced word from me became a scandal retold for years. Birthdays when my choices were dissected until my laughter felt hollow. Walking into this house was like stepping into a theater where the script had already been written. Grace would always be the failure. Grace. Margaret's voice cut through the warmth of the foyer, as crisp and cold as the autumn wind outside. She appeared in a tailored navy dress, pearls tight against her throat, her eyes traveling from my coat to the second-hand boots Lily wore. Still, renting that little place on Chestnut Street? My mother's smile was thin, a slash that pretended to welcome but sliced nonetheless. I forced myself to meet her gaze. Yes, Mom, it works for us. I looked down at Lily, who was staring at the floor, her small shoulders drawn in, absorbing the tension she could not name. Robert appeared behind Margaret, broad-shouldered and commanding, his gray hair immaculately combed, the patriarchal presence that dominated every room. "Happy Thanksgiving," he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. His hug was perfunctory, more ceremonial than heartfelt, as if ticking a box. I told myself not to shrink, not to apologize, not tonight. The dining room sparkled with its usual grandeur, crystal glasses aligned perfectly, silver cutlery polished to gleam beneath the chandelier. The long mahogany table was crowded with relatives, laughter buzzing like static. Yet when Lily and I took our seats, I felt the distance in every glance. My cousins shifted to make space, but no one drew me into conversation. Their eyes lingered on my hands, my clothes, the absence of any ring. I tried to eat, to focus on Lily, to remind her that Thanksgiving was about gratitude. But gratitude was hard to muster when each bite of turkey was seasoned with disdain. Margaret's comments slid across the table like knives wrapped in silk. "You know, darling," she said loudly enough for everyone, "owning property really is the mark of stability. Children need roots, don't they?" I caught the flicker in Lily's eyes. She understood more than I wanted her to. I pressed her hand beneath the table. "We have our roots," I murmured, "right here." But my voice sounded small even to me. The meal stretched on, filled with subtle cruelties disguised as casual remarks. My cousin boasted about his promotion, another about her new house in Beacon Hill. I offered a story about Lily's school project, her drawing that had won praise, but it barely stirred acknowledgement. My words slid off the lacquered surface of the table like drops of water on glass. The wine flowed, the laughter grew, and yet I felt myself fading, like wallpaper too old to notice. Still, I remembered every Thanksgiving past, every dismissal. I had thought, foolishly, that tonight might be different, that bringing Lily would soften them, remind them of family. But their eyes told me otherwise. I was judged before the meal even began, a verdict passed silently, irrevocably. I chewed each bite slowly, tasting more bitterness than flavor. My chair seemed smaller, my presence shrinking, as their expectations loomed large. Lily leaned her head against my arm, and for a moment, I closed my eyes, clinging to her quiet faith in me. She was the only one who didn't measure my worth against a mortgage or a resume. The clatter of cutlery and hum of conversation blurred until Margaret's voice rose above it once more, lower this time, conspiratorial. She leaned toward Robert, her lips barely moving, but her words sliced through me like a blade carried by the air. We need to set her straight tonight. The last time I trusted love, it left me with a newborn in my arms. The memory doesn't wait for permission, it floods back whenever I hear a remark that cuts too close, whenever I see disdain in my parents' eyes. Tonight, sitting at that glittering table, Margaret's tone had already begun carving me open, and suddenly, I was no longer 30 years old in 2023 but 24 again, shivering in a cramped apartment where the heating never worked properly, clutching hope in one hand and fear in the other. Ethan had paced the length of the tiny kitchen, his sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. His jaw clenched in that way I used to think was strength, but now I recognized as cowardice wrapped in anger. "I can't do this, Grace," he had said, his voice sharp enough to slice the little dream I had been carrying. "You can't do what?" I'd asked, though deep down I already knew. My hand rested over my belly, the smallest swell of life already present, a miracle I hadn't expected, but had quickly grown to protect with every fiber of my being. "This," he gestured wildly, at the stack of unopened bills, at the second-hand crib I had brought home from a thrift store. At me, my body no longer just my own. "I'm not cut out for this. I didn't sign up to be a father at 25. You're asking me to throw away everything." I remember the way the radiator hissed like it was mocking me, the thin walls carrying the sound of neighbors laughing at some sitcom, as if the world outside continued spinning while mine threatened to collapse. "You think this is about you throwing your life away?" My voice cracked, but I forced it steady. "This is our child, Ethan. Our child. She didn't ask to be here, but she deserves more than this, more than a father who runs." His face hardened. "Don't put this on me. You're the one who decided to keep it." The words hit harder than any slap could. I looked at him then, really looked at the man I had once believed would be my partner, my safety, my future. All I saw was a boy fleeing responsibility. "You don't mean that," I whispered, more prayer than statement. But he did. His eyes had already shifted toward the door, already measuring the distance between us and his freedom. And when I begged him to at least try, his final words became a curse branded into my memory. "You'll never make it without me." The door slammed, and the sound of his absence was louder than any fight we had ever had. I sank to the floor, arms wrapped around myself, around the life inside me. I cried until my voice went raw, until exhaustion left me in silence. Then, slowly, I wiped my face, stood up, and told myself that if he wasn't strong enough, then I would be. I raised Lily with every ounce of quiet determination I could gather. I worked late shifts, studied after midnight, learned how to stretch every dollar until it squeaked. I avoided my parents' scrutiny as much as possible, because to them, Ethan's abandonment wasn't a tragedy, it was proof that I was exactly what they always thought. Reckless, unworthy, incapable. So I built walls of silence and resolve, and inside them Lily and I found a way to laugh, to live, to survive. That resilience carried me into every family gathering since. I told myself I wouldn't flinch when they compared me to my cousins, wouldn't let their comments cut deeper than they deserved. But sitting at the table tonight, with the weight of years pressing down, the echo of Ethan's voice overlapped with my mother's. The chandelier sparkled overhead, throwing light that felt too harsh. I blinked back into the present as Margaret leaned closer, her smirk sharpened like a blade polished for the occasion. "Still renting, Grace?" she asked. Her voice dipped in syrup but laced with poison. Every toast feels like a dagger wrapped in polite laughter. Crystal glasses chimed around me, their delicate ringing filling the air like a mockery of warmth. I held my own glass carefully, fingers tight against the stem, though I hardly tasted the wine. The dining room, with its golden chandelier and polished mahogany table, looked like a picture in a magazine. But for me, it had always been a stage one where my failures were the evening's entertainment. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his cufflinks glinting under the lights. He raised his glass high, his voice booming with confidence that seemed rehearsed. "To a year of growth," he declared, his grin wide. "Our company has expanded to 3 new cities. We're projected to double revenue by spring." Everyone clapped, the sound rolling across the table like applause at a theater. I smiled faintly, though the words lodged in my chest. I knew what would follow. The comparison was inevitable, subtle or not. Caroline, in her sleek emerald dress, added sweetly, "And our twins, oh Robert, you'll love this. They've just been accepted into St. Mark's Academy, only the finest private school in the state. It's competitive, but when children are raised right, doors simply open for them. Her gaze flickered toward Lily, who sat quietly at my side, trying to cut her turkey into neat little squares. Lily's hands moved carefully, her lips pressed thin. Aware of the weight of that glance, my heart tightened. "That's wonderful," Margaret replied, her smile as sharp as glass. "It's always rewarding when children reflect their parents' success." Her words dripped with purpose, every syllable directed across the table at me. Daniel leaned forward, smirk tugging at his lips. "Grace, do you still rent that apartment near Chestnut? Thought you'd have moved on by now. A house is an investment, you know." Something real. Laughter rippled lightly, casual and cruel. I felt Lily's hand graze mine beneath the table, her small palm trembling, as if to ground me. I drew a breath. "We're comfortable where we are. Lily loves the neighborhood." Caroline tilted her head, faux sympathy in her voice. "Oh, that's sweet. Though, of course, a child benefits most from stability. A permanent home, strong community ties. That's how children truly thrive." Lily stiffened, her fork stalling midair. My blood ran hot. I wanted to shout that Lily was thriving, that she was kind, creative, resilient, but my voice felt trapped, caged by years of conditioning in this house. Robert sat at the head of the table, his eyes steady but unmoved. He cut into his turkey with meticulous care, never lifting his gaze to intervene, never breaking the ritual silence that signaled approval of Margaret's reign. His silence screamed louder than any insult. The tension mounted with each polished word, every backhanded compliment. I watched the room close in, walls of judgment pressing tighter. It was not conversation. It was combat, masked in smiles and clinking glasses. Margaret leaned forward, her pearls catching the light as her lips curved in that familiar, disdainful smile. Her voice rang clear, slicing through the room, through me. "A woman without a house is a woman without worth." The words struck harder than Ethan's betrayal years before, harder than any look of pity or scorn. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My chest burned as though all the oxygen had been stripped from the room. The glass in my hand trembled violently, the wine inside quivering with it. My vision blurred. My pulse quickened. I felt the stem of the glass slip against my damp fingers, and in that instant, I nearly dropped it, the sound of shattering crystal hovering like a threat in the air. The turkey wasn't the only thing carved that night, it was me. The knife glided through golden skin and steaming meat at the center of the table, but each word from my family sliced deeper than any blade could. I forced myself to chew, to swallow, though every bite tasted like ash. Margaret's eyes gleamed, her lips curled in that satisfied smile she wore when she was about to make a point, when cruelty was staged as concern. She dabbed delicately at her mouth with her napkin, then set it down with deliberate care. "Grace," she began, her voice ringing above the quiet clatter of cutlery. "It's time we said what we've all been thinking. You are useless." The word landed like a stone, useless. It echoed in my chest, reverberating against years of doubt, nights of exhaustion, mornings of starting over. I felt Lily stiffen beside me, her small hand clutching mine beneath the table, her nails digging into my palm in silent protest. Carolyn gave a high, pitying laugh. "Oh, Margaret, you're too harsh," she said, though her smile betrayed delight. "It's not her fault she hasn't managed. Much. Some people simply don't have the drive." The table rippled with laughter, thinly veiled, brittle as glass. I lowered my gaze, the fork heavy in my hand, my reflection warped in its polished steel. Daniel leaned in, his voice dripping with mock brotherly advice. "You know, Grace, maybe what you need is a real man. Someone to take responsibility, to give you a house, a life worth showing off. It's not too late, you know. Just lower your standards." Heat surged in my throat. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. They didn't want answers, only silence to shape as evidence of my inadequacy. I felt the room spin with laughter and whispers, my chair suddenly too small, the air too thin. Margaret's eyes hardened. "Your sister built a family anyone would be proud of. Daniel commands respect in business. And you? Renting, scraping by, still clinging to some fantasy of independence? You embarrass us, Grace. You embarrass this family." The chandelier above threw sharp light across the table, illuminating every sneer, every nod of agreement. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then Robert, who had sat in stony silence all evening, pushed his chair back. The sound scraped against the marble floor like thunder. He rose slowly, his face carved from stone, then slammed his fist onto the table so hard the wine glasses rattled. "Enough," he roared, the authority in his voice shaking the walls of the house he so fiercely claimed. His eyes locked onto mine, colder than I had ever seen them. "If you cannot live up to this family's name, get out of my house." The words hit harder than Margaret's disdain, harder than Ethan's abandonment. My own father, the man who once lifted me onto his shoulders when I was a child, who promised I would always have a place here, now exiled me in front of everyone. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the sound of Lily's trembling whisper. "Mom, are we in trouble?" We left the house that night with nothing but our dignity barely intact. The November wind cut through my coat as though it weren't even there, slicing against my cheeks, making Lily shiver beside me. She clung to my arm, her wide eyes still wet from tears she had tried to hide. Behind us, the mansion's lights glowed like a beacon for a family that had chosen to cast us out, its windows glittering with laughter and warmth that felt poisoned now. Every step I took away from that house was both liberation and wound, the pavement beneath my boots striking like a drumbeat of rejection. I tightened my grip on my handbag, knuckles white. It was instinct at first, the simple motion of someone trying to anchor herself after being shoved into the void. But in that pressure, I felt the small, hard edge of the USB drive nestled in the hidden pocket. My heart jolted. Evidence. Proof. A lifeline I hadn't intended to think about tonight, but fate seemed determined to drag me toward it. I kept my hand there as if protecting more than just an object, protecting possibility. By the time we reached the modest hotel in the city, Lily had fallen asleep against my side, exhaustion claiming her small frame. The receptionist barely looked up when I checked in, sliding a plastic keycard across the counter. The room was simple. One queen bed, thin curtains, a humming heater that coughed every few minutes. But it was ours. Ours, not theirs. I laid Lily gently onto the bed, tucking the blanket around her. My chest ached as I watched her face twitch in restless dreams. She deserved better than whispered cruelty and public humiliation. She deserved safety. She deserved a mother who could protect her from the very people who should have been her refuge. The knock at the door was soft but steady. I froze for a moment, fear flaring, but then a familiar voice whispered, "Grace? It's me." I opened the door to find Diane standing there, her scarf pulled tightly around her neck, her expression fierce but sympathetic. She had been my assistant once, years ago, back when I still had some place within the family business. They had discarded her the moment she showed loyalty to me, but she had never wavered. Diane stepped inside, shaking off the cold. She glanced at Lily, then back at me. I heard what happened. Her jaw tightened. They've finally gone too far. The weight of everything threatened to crush me, and for a moment my shoulders sagged. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," I whispered. They made sure I walked away with nothing. Her eyes sharpened. "Nothing? Grace, you've been the one keeping them afloat for years. Remember who managed the numbers? Who found the missing funds before Daniel buried them? Who made sure Robert's reputation never collapsed under his bad deals?" She stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. "You did, not them." The words hit me with both comfort and sting. Memories unspooled long nights reconciling accounts, cleaning up after their mistakes, covering for their arrogance so the Miller name could shine untarnished. They had never thanked me. Instead, they had sharpened their knives. "They think you're powerless," Diane continued, her gaze steady. "But you're not. You've always had leverage." I looked at my handbag again, my fingers brushing that tiny USB. The weight of years pressed into my palm. Financial records, transfers they'd hidden, transactions that could unravel the perfect tapestry of wealth and respectability they flaunted tonight. I drew a long breath. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window, pale and exhausted but unbroken. "They wanted war," I murmured. My voice trembled, then steadied with steel. "They'll have it." The heater rattled on, filling the silence as I pulled the laptop from my bag. My hands shook only slightly as I flipped it open, the screen's glow illuminating the small room, cutting through the shadows like a promise. I slid the USB into place, my pulse racing as the files populated the screen, rows and rows of numbers, contracts, hidden accounts. Secrets they thought buried. Diane leaned over my shoulder, her lips curving into the faintest smile as the evidence came to life before us. "Are you ready to show them who's useless now?" I had more power in a folder of PDFs than my father had in his mansion. The The glow of my laptop lit the dim hotel room, throwing pale shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Lily was asleep, her small breath steady and fragile, a rhythm I clung to in the silence. Diane sat beside me at the desk, arms crossed, her reflection sharp in the screen's glass. The files loaded one after another, the cursor blinking like a pulse, daring me to see the truth I had carried for years. Numbers, receipts, transfers. All cold, sterile lines of text, but together they told a story more intimate than any family dinner. I scrolled through Daniel's records first. Page after page revealed my signatures, my personal funds injected into his failing company when no bank would lend him a cent. I had disguised the transactions as consulting reimbursements, careful not to expose him, but unwilling to let the business collapse when it carried our family name. He had called me desperate tonight, mocking my rented apartment, without a trace of awareness that his polished suit had been stitched from my quiet sacrifice. Caroline's records were next private school tuition for her children, checks signed by me, pulled from savings I never admitted to having. She had boasted tonight about her children's brilliance, as if it had bloomed solely from her nurturing hands. Yet here lay the proof that I had been the soil beneath their success, invisible, uncredited. Then Robert, my father, the man whose approval I had chased like a horizon. Mortgage payments on his second property, covered by temporary transfers from my accounts. The mansion he now used as a stage to humiliate me had been kept standing by the very daughter he had called useless. My throat burned as the realization hardened inside me without me. Their empire would have cracked years ago. Diane leaned closer, her breath warm against my shoulder. "This is dynamite," she murmured, her tone both reverent and afraid. "If you drop this, Grace, you don't get to pick up the pieces later. Once it's out, there's no turning back." I swallowed, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Images flickered in my mind, Lily laughing in the park, Lily clinging to me tonight as Robert's voice thundered us out of the house. The world would know what kind of people they truly were, but at what cost? "They'll hate you more," Diane whispered. "Even the ones who already owe you everything. Are you ready for that?" My fingers hovered over the trackpad. The files were ready to be emailed, printed, leaked to lawyers or journalists. My heart pounded. For years I had chosen silence over conflict, believing that dignity meant endurance. But tonight the silence felt like complicity. Tonight, endurance felt like surrender. I closed my eyes and drew in a deep breath, steadying the storm inside. When I spoke, my voice was low, but it carried the certainty of iron. "It's not revenge. It's justice." The words settled between us, heavier than any toast I had endured at their table. Diane studied me, then nodded once, her jaw set. The heater rattled, filling the moment with mechanical static. I clicked through the files again, organizing them into folders, renaming them with dates and cross-references. Each click was a drumbeat, each folder a weapon lined and sharpened. This was my arsenal, not guns, not knives, but proof. Proof that the foundation of their pride was built on the back of the daughter they had discarded. And then, just as I saved the final folder, the laptop chimed. A new email appeared at the top of the inbox. The sender's name froze my veins, Robert Miller. The subject line read, "Repayment Notice, $250,000 loan outstanding." I stared at it, pulse hammering. A loan? There had never been one. I didn't need to roar, a whisper would rattle their empire. That truth sat in me like a quiet flame as I opened Robert's email again, the fabricated loan demand staring back at me like a dare. Diane had stayed the night in the adjoining room. But at dawn we were both awake, the hotel's stale coffee brewing between us as the glow of my laptop flickered across her face. She leaned forward, eyes sharp with anticipation, while I hovered over the reply button. I typed slowly, choosing every word with surgical care. "Dear Robert, I've received your notice. Interesting that you would raise repayment now, considering the transfers made on the 18th of July, 2020, and the subsequent cover under Miller Holdings." My pulse quickened as I watched Diane's eyebrows lift. She knew, as I did, that those were dates and labels he never expected me to reference. I added one final line, a velvet blade wrapped in politeness. "Perhaps we should reconcile accounts more transparently. Wouldn't want misunderstandings, would we?" When I hit send, the silence afterward was deafening. Diane exhaled slowly, a smile ghosting across her lips. "The hook is in," she whispered, her voice thick with satisfaction. "He'll be scrambling right now, wondering how much you know." And he was. Across the city, in his study lined with mahogany and arrogance, Robert Miller's confidence cracked like thin ice. He read the email twice, then a third time, the mention of dates and hidden transfers sending panic coursing down his spine. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone. I pictured him there, sweat beading at his temple as he dialed Daniel. The man who had thundered me out of his home was reduced to a whisper, voice taut with fear. "Did you tell her?" The line on Daniel's end went silent for a moment too long, a hesitation that burned hotter than any answer. Robert's gut twisted. If Daniel hadn't told me, then how had I known? Who else had whispered in my ear? Back in the hotel room, Diane clinked her coffee cup against mine, a quiet toast. "You've moved the first piece, Grace. Now let him chase shadows." I sat back in my chair, the weight of years of silence lifting fraction by fraction. This wasn't revenge, it was precision. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to beg. All I had to do was lay the breadcrumbs of truth and let them follow the trail into their own ruin. The faintest smile tugged at my lips. My reflection in the laptop screen stared back, no longer timid, no longer desperate for their approval. I leaned closer, whispering to the image of the man who had raised me, only to cast me aside. "Got you!" Every lie they told was another knot in the noose tightening around them. I sat hunched over the hotel desk, papers and PDF files spread in organized chaos, my fingers running across line after line of numbers. Diane leaned over my shoulder, her hair falling forward as she pointed to one set of entries. "If you want to cut deep," she said softly, "you don't go for Robert. Not yet. You go for the ones who lean on his shadow." She was right. Caroline, with her manicured pride and the facade of flawless children at a prestigious private school, had always boasted the loudest at family dinners. She wore tuition invoices like jewels, proof of superiority. But the truth on my laptop told another story. I had been quietly covering those fees for 2 years. Caroline hadn't written more than a token check. With a few taps, I composed a carefully worded message, anonymous, but devastating to the school's financial office. Concerning tuition payments, records may reflect discrepancies in who is listed as primary payer. Please review attached documentation. I attached one PDF, nothing more than a single ledger line, enough to open questions but not enough to expose my hand entirely. Diane exhaled as if she could already hear Caroline's shriek echoing through the Boston suburbs. By noon, the cracks were spreading. Daniel, puffed up as the empire builder of the family, faced his own unraveling. I had held every receipt of my loans that had become silent capital for his company's rise. Quietly, through a network Diane helped me reach, those files found their way into the inboxes of his 2 most anxious investors. The questions were immediate and sharp. Why are these payments not reflected in the books? Who actually owns a share of Miller Tech? I imagined Daniel stammering, his smug grin faltering under the scrutiny of men with more power than him. That image alone was a balm to my bruised pride. Meanwhile, Robert tried to play the patriarch, the peacemaker, even as he felt the rope tighten around his throat. He called Daniel, demanded answers. He called Caroline, told her to ignore gossip from the school, but none of them listened. Fear makes loyalty a thin fabric, and theirs was already frayed. The breaking point came that evening. Caroline, her face flushed with rage, stormed into Robert's oak-paneled study. The walls, lined with leather-bound books, could not muffle her fury. She slammed a stack of notices on his desk, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Did Grace fund everything? My kids, Daniel's company, even your damned mortgage. Tell me, Robert, is our entire life built on her pity?" Robert's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the desk so hard his knuckles whitened. The air between them was poisonous, heavy with a truth he could neither confirm nor deny. Then, with a sudden violence, he rose and slammed the study door shut, the echo reverberating through the mansion like a gavel. He was determined to answer, but not yet, not aloud. They struck back harder, but desperation makes sloppy enemies. From the dim light of the hotel desk lamp, I watched the storm unfold as if I were still seated at that long mahogany table in the mansion. Except this time, I wasn't their victim, I was their shadow, their uninvited witness. The Millers convened in Robert's study that morning. Diane had tapped into an open video link through one of the house's security feeds, something she had quietly installed years ago when managing estate contractors. On the screen, I saw Robert pacing, his jaw tight, while Margaret sat in a high-backed chair, like a queen stripped of her crown. Daniel stood near the fireplace, checking his phone every 5 seconds, while Caroline lingered by the window, arms crossed, eyes blazing with a fear she tried to disguise as fury. Robert finally slammed a folder on the desk. Enough. She's playing games with scraps of paper, but we have lawyers. Real leverage. He pulled out a card, sliding it across to Daniel. I've already contacted Pearson. He's drawing up a defamation claim. We'll bury her before she thinks she can speak another word. Margaret's voice dripped with contempt, every syllable honed like a blade. She's unstable. Always has been. Raising a child alone, still renting, pretending to be accomplished when she's really just bitter. If she dares take this public, we'll brand her what she is. A disgrace. Caroline turned sharply, her composure fracturing. Brand her? Mother, she paid for my children's school. Do you know what the headmistress asked me this morning? If tuition would be continued this semester. Continued. How do you plan to explain that in court? Daniel cut her off with a wave of his hand. Caroline, don't be naive. This isn't about truth, it's about control. If she tries to tie herself to my company, we sever her legally. Papers can be drafted. Retroactive contract. I'll erase her stake like she never existed. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tight but not with fear, with recognition. Their words were knives, but knives wielded by shaking hands. Every syllable confirmed the one thing they hadn't admitted before. I mattered. My existence, my sacrifices had become the foundation they were now desperate to patch over. Then Diane leaned closer, her whisper cutting through the scene like a spark in gasoline. Pearson, the lawyer Robert just mentioned, I know him. I turned sharply. Her eyes glinted with a mixture of surprise and calculation. We worked together when I was paralegal at Whitman and Cole. He owes me a favor, a big one. If Robert thinks Pearson will bury you, he's mistaken. I can have every draft, every strategy note, forwarded to us before they even sign. On the screen, Robert's voice rose. We move quickly. If she wants a fight, she'll regret it. I closed the laptop, the echo of their plotting fading into silence. My pulse slowed, steady, and deliberate, like the countdown before detonation. They wanted court. They wanted the sharp light of cross-examination, the public spectacle of family secrets laid bare. Then so be it. I smirked, the words leaving my lips like a vow etched in stone. So they want court? Let's give them court. The truth wasn't my weapon, it was my shield. That night the hotel room felt less like exile and more like a war room. The curtains were drawn tight against the Boston night, the glow of my laptop casting pale light across stacks of documents, receipts, and drives. Diane sat across from me, her focus razor sharp, her loyalty no longer something I questioned but something I relied on as completely as breath. I've checked the last batch of PDFs twice, she murmured, her eyes flicking from one spreadsheet to another. But if you're holding an ace, Grace, it's time to put it on the table. I reached for the small leather folder I had carried for years. To anyone else, it was an unremarkable file, but to me it was salvation, forged in quiet secrecy while my family gloated at my supposed failures. I slid out a single sheet of paper, its ink faded but the signature bold. Robert's signature, his prideful flourish beneath the damning line. Authorization to mobilize funds borrowed from Grace Miller for estate refinancing. Diane's eyes widened. She drew in a sharp breath, holding the page as if it might burn her fingers. This is a signed acknowledgement. He didn't just take your money, he borrowed it, which means there's an obligation to repay. And if this comes out, he's ruined, I finished softly. But evidence meant nothing if it couldn't stand up to scrutiny. Diane leaned closer, pulling her laptop forward. We can't rely on a single document. Let me cross-check. If I can find emails, correspondence, even a calendar note, it will cement authenticity. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and within minutes she was digging into an archive of communications I had stored away. Lines of emails surfaced. Robert corresponding with estate brokers, referencing Grace's contribution, noting wire transfers, thanking me in perfunctory language for family loyalty. Each message was another nail in the coffin he had built for himself. Diane looked up, her eyes alight with vindication. This isn't just circumstantial. This is a chain. Document, signature, emails, transfers. It's airtight. I sat back, exhaustion mingling with exhilaration. For years, I had been the silent benefactor, dismissed as weak while they fed off my labor. But now the silence was over. The truth had weight, and I would let it crash upon them. I'll package it, Diane said, her voice steady. A public file, nothing fancy, just the facts. attached to reporters who owe me favors. My fingers brushed over Robert's signature once more. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. The shield I had crafted piece by piece when no one else believed in me. I leaned in close, my voice barely more than a whisper, but filled with resolve. Tomorrow, the world will know. Across town, while Diane worked quietly beside me, Margaret sat in her pristine bedroom, the house around her, silent, but heavy with unease. Her phone buzzed once, a single notification. She frowned, opened it. An anonymous message glared back. Check tomorrow's headlines. The blood drained from her face. It wasn't my voice that shook them, it was the silence after the truth drop. The family call had been arranged under the guise of resolving matters. Robert demanded it, Margaret approved it, and Daniel clicked the link with an arrogance that practically seeped through the screen. Caroline appeared late, her face sharp, lips pressed into a permanent sneer. Only Diane and I knew what this meeting would truly become a hearing, not of my making but of theirs. When the screen divided into 6 squares, there was an almost theatrical symmetry to it. Robert at the head, Margaret's glass of wine glittering in her hand, Daniel adjusting his tie though he wasn't in a boardroom, Caroline perched like a hawk, and me silent, my camera steady, Lily asleep in the next room. Unaware that her mother was about to fracture a dynasty with a few keystrokes, Robert began with thunder in his voice. Grace, enough of these games. You've harassed your siblings, leaked lies, and attempted to embarrass this family. This is your final chance to withdraw before we proceed with legal. Stop. My voice cut through, quiet but edged with steel. Diane touched my arm, a signal, and I clicked share screen. The black box of my desktop filled their view. A folder named Receipts. Then a PDF flickered open. The signed document. For a moment, the room was suspended in frozen air. Margaret's fingers tightened around her glass. Caroline leaned closer, eyes darting. Daniel frowned. Robert's lips thinned. This, I said, my tone measured, is your acknowledgement, Father. Your authorization to use funds borrowed from me for the estate. My money built the roof above your head. My savings paid the mortgage you flaunt as your legacy. Caroline let out a brittle laugh. This is fabricated, a sad attempt at... But Daniel cut her off, eyes narrowing. That's his signature. His words were quiet, but their weight fell like a stone into water, rippling across the call. Margaret turned sharply. Daniel! What? You want me to lie with my own neck on the line? He leaned back, rubbing his temple. Yes, Grace gave money years ago. Yes. Some of it covered tuition, debts, business startup costs. But it wasn't charity, it was family, Robert exploded, his voice shaking the microphone. Family doesn't tally numbers like a ledger. Family sacrifices without turning it into blackmail. I leaned closer, my face filling their screens. My heart thundered, but my voice was calm, deliberate. Sacrifice? You called me useless. You kicked me out in front of Lily. Yet the house you call your pride stands because of me. Every brick, every gleaming chandelier, every banquet table dripping with false honor, I carried it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, charged, the kind of silence where truth leaves no air to breathe. Caroline looked away first. Daniel rubbed his jaw, conflicted. Robert's rage faltered into something smaller, fear, recognition, loss of ground. Margaret's hand trembled. Her glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor, the sound piercing through the video feed. She didn't even move to clean it. She only stared, pale, her lips parted but unable to form words. And in that silence I knew, the unmasking had begun. When kings fall, they don't stumble, they shatter. The video call resumed after the glass shattered, but the room on their end no longer looked like a dinner table of aristocracy. Robert had retreated into his study, pacing before a wall of leather-bound books that no one had ever read, his face red with fury. Margaret hovered behind him, still pale, still rattled. Daniel and Caroline appeared in their separate squares, both restless, both stripped of the smug composure they had wielded hours earlier. You think you've trapped me with papers and digital trickery? Robert barked, his voice cracking with both age and rage. He leaned forward, glaring at the camera as if he could burn me through the pixels. Grace, you're a parasite, a trainer clinging to the empire I built. You would be nothing if not for me. My jaw tightened, but I didn't speak. Diane sat beside me, her hand calm against the table. I didn't need to reply. The documents already did the talking. Daniel, of all people, was the first to crack. His tie was gone, his shirt rumpled. He raked his fingers through his hair and muttered, "Dad, stop. Just stop. She's not lying. Half my company wouldn't exist without her deposits. The seed money, it wasn't from my savings, it was hers." Caroline spun toward him, eyes sharp, voice slicing the air. "You mean to tell me that while I was scraping to cover the boys' school fees, while I was begging you for help, you let her bankroll you? You let Grace keep the truth while you played the prodigal son?" Daniel slammed his fist against his desk, his square of the screen jolting. "You knew the money didn't come from me, Caroline. You wanted the tuition paid, and I gave it to you. Don't act shocked now. Don't act holy." Margaret's hand shook as she tried to maintain some vestige of order. "Enough, both of you. We can fix this. We just need to regroup privately, without her eavesdropping." Caroline cut her off with a sharp laugh, bitter as acid. "Regroup? You mean cover it up, the way you've always done? How long have you known Margaret? How long did you sip your wine while she paid your bills?" Robert's hand struck the desk like a gavel. "Silence!" His roar was hoarse, desperate. His authority was a ghost now, a shadow of the man who once commanded fear, with nothing but a glance. "This family stands because of me. My name, my discipline, my sacrifices. Not hers, never hers." But even as he spoke, his chest heaved with an unfamiliar weakness. His hand clutched at the collar of his shirt, tugging as if the very fabric suffocated him. His skin, once flushed with rage, drained to an ashen pallor. His breaths grew ragged, uneven, punctuated by gasps he tried to disguise as more words. Caroline's voice turned sharp with panic. "Robert, what's happening to you?" Daniel leaned closer to his camera. "Dad?" Margaret's wineglass slipped from her hand again, this time unnoticed as it rolled across the carpet of the study. She reached for him, her shrill cry breaking the silence. "Robert, sit down, please." But Robert staggered back from the desk, his hand clutching his chest. He tried to form another curse, another denial, but the words collapsed with him. His knees buckled, and the patriarch of the Miller family fell, not with dignity, not with control, but with the sound of authority shattering like glass. The camera tilted wildly as Margaret screamed, rushing to his side. The feed blurred with chaos, Daniel shouting, Caroline frozen in horror. And then, piercing through all of it, Margaret's scream split the air, raw and guttural, echoing into my hotel room like a bell tolling the end of an era. "He's not breathing." The Miller name was worth less than the paper of their debts. By the time the ambulance pulled away from the mansion, neighbors were already spilling onto their porches, whispering, pointing, speculating. Word traveled faster than the sirens. Robert Miller, once the iron figure of the neighborhood, had been carried out, unconscious, while Margaret clutched at his hand like a drowning woman. The empire he built on image and intimidation was unraveling before curious eyes. 2 hours later, while Margaret tried to summon what remained of her poise in the study, the doorbell rang. The uniformed courier carried no flowers, no condolences, no warm pies from sympathetic neighbors. Instead, he held a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the bank. His tone was professional, unyielding, as he handed it to Daniel. "Notice of foreclosure," Daniel read aloud, the words heavy, each syllable like stone dropped into silence. Carolyn gasped. Margaret's fingers tightened on her pearls. The bank had been patient, but patience had limits, and Grace's payments, once a secret lifeline, had stopped. By late afternoon, gossip churned like wildfire. At the corner cafe, neighbors shook their heads over steaming cups. Can you believe it? The Millers, of all families, always lecturing about stability, about tradition. Another voice chimed in, hushed but cruel. Guess their wealth was a facade. You see that ambulance? Karma comes quick. Curtains twitched along the street as whispers multiplied. Caroline tried to maintain her facade of control at the private school board meeting that evening, but the mask fractured quickly. One parent stood and asked, pointedly, if tuition for her children would be paid on time this term. Another murmured, "Didn't I hear that Grace was the one keeping them afloat?" The words spread, repeated, reshaped, until Caroline's composure snapped. Her cheeks burned as she gathered her papers, leaving the room under the weight of stares she once commanded. Daniel fared no better. Investors had already called him earlier that day, demanding explanations for inconsistencies in the accounts. Without Grace's silent contributions, his empire was little more than smoke. He spent the evening in frantic phone calls, his voice hoarse, his arguments feeble. No reassurance satisfied them. Back at the mansion, Margaret sat in Robert's chair, though the seat dwarfed her. The notice lay open on the desk, its bold print undeniable. The neighbors' whispers reached her ears even within these walls. The air outside was heavy with pity disguised as curiosity. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edges of the paper, the pearls at her throat cutting into her skin. For the first time, Margaret's mask slipped entirely. Her voice, hoarse with disbelief, filled the empty study. The useless one was our only pillar. The admission tasted like ash on her tongue. The phone on the desk rang, sharp, merciless. Margaret reached for it, and Grace's voice, steady and cold, cut through the line like steel. "Have you had enough?" For the first time, their pleas carried no weight with me. The video call split the screen into two worlds. On one side, the Miller mansion shrouded in chaos, voices raised, tears streaking faces, papers scattered like fallen leaves. On the other, the quiet sanctuary of a modest hotel room where I sat with Diane at my side and Lily leaning gently against me. The contrast was almost cruel. Their desperation collided with my calm, and for once, I held the gravity that decided their fate. Margaret's voice came first, thin and unrecognizable, stripped of its haughty edge. "Grace, you have to understand. It was just words at dinner. We didn't mean—" She choked on the sentence, her composure unraveling as quickly as the empire around her. Daniel leaned into the frame, his eyes bloodshot. "Grace, please. If those accounts you showed are real, we're finished. The investors are already pulling out. Just tell them you'll back us again. I'll do anything." Caroline, once the embodiment of superiority, now trembled, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "The children think of them, Grace. You can't punish them for our mistakes. Please." I let them speak, their pleas tumbling over one another, voices rising in desperation. Then quietly, I began to recount. Word for word. "You mocked me for renting an apartment. You told me a woman without a house is worthless. You called me useless in front of my daughter. Daniel, you said I should find a real man. And you," I looked straight at Margaret, "you whispered to set me straight like a child in need of scolding." Each sentence landed like a blow, not shouted, but recited in a voice steady as stone. The silence on their end deepened with every word. Lily's small voice pierced the tension, innocent and devastating. "Grandma, why did you say Mommy was useless when she helped you all this time?" Her wide eyes searched the screen, confused, wounded, a child's sincerity cutting deeper than any accusation I could have crafted. No one answered. Margaret looked away. Caroline covered her face. Daniel rubbed his temples, defeated. Robert sat hunched in the corner, pale, his hands shaking. I drew a long breath. The weight of years of humiliation finally lifted. "My daughter will never need your approval," I said, each syllable like a final decree. "She will grow knowing her worth comes from her own strength, not your judgment." The room on their side broke apart. Caroline sobbed openly. Daniel cursed under his breath. Margaret's lips quivered as if she wanted to lash out but had no weapon left. And Robert, the patriarch who had once banished me with a slam of his fist, lowered his head into his hands. His shoulders shook, the image of authority collapsing into a broken man. The call ended not with me pressing the button, but with their silence, their world crumbling while mine stood unshaken. Leaving them behind wasn't lost, it was liberating. The words echoed in my chest as Lily's hand slipped into mine, her fingers small but sure, as if she sensed that what we carried with us now mattered more than what we left behind. The Miami airport was alive with the hum of holiday travelers. Christmas lights strung across walkways like fragile promises of joy. People hurried past with laughter, luggage, and plans. For once, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was part of the movement forward. Diane stood with us at the terminal, her coat draped loosely over her arm. She had been the quiet force at my side, steady through the storm, and now she smiled with the kind of pride that asked for nothing in return. "You've done more than survive, Grace," she said softly. "You've rewritten the story they tried to trap you in." I nodded, my throat tight. There was so much I could have said thank you, goodbye. I couldn't have done this without you, but all of it felt too small. Instead, I reached out and squeezed her hand, letting the silence hold the weight of everything we had shared. My phone buzzed. A new email notification blinked across the screen. The sender, Robert Miller. My father. The subject line, "I'm sorry." For a moment, I hesitated. My thumb hovered above the preview, curiosity pulling at me like an old reflex. I opened it just long enough to see the first few words I was wrong. Grace, please forgive. Then I closed it. Without ceremony, I dragged the email to trash, deleting decades of expectation with a flick of my finger. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. His apology belonged to the ruins of the life I had already left behind. In the days leading up to this flight, I had transferred funds, liquidated shares, and funneled everything into charities, shelters for single mothers, scholarships for children like Lily, programs I wished had been there when I was 23, and terrified. Money had been their chain, their weapon, their measure of worth. Now, it was my offering, a way to cleanse it of their corruption. Lily tugged at my sleeve as we walked toward the gate. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the glow of twinkling lights. "Is this really our home, Mom?" she asked. I crouched to her height, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, carrying a conviction I hadn't felt in years. "Finally ours. No one can take it away." The loudspeaker called for boarding. As we stepped into the jet bridge, the scent of the sea drifted faintly through the vents, mingling with the sterile air of travel. Ahead of us lay Miami, sunlight and saltwater, a city where no Miller name could cast a shadow over us. I paused, glancing back through the glass walls of the airport one last time, not toward Boston, not toward the mansion that had exiled me, but toward the horizon itself. A stretch of possibility, unmarked, unclaimed. "The truth sets us free," I whispered, the words carried away in the hum of engines and the murmur of strangers. Lily leaned into me, warm and unburdened, and together we stepped forward. Beneath the ruins of the Miller family's pride, one truth had risen unshaken: betrayal may wound, but it cannot reign forever. The daughter they once cast aside became the mirror that forced them to see their own corruption, and in that reflection justice finally found its voice. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime, no matter how late it arrives. Like a tide against fragile stone, lies will always erode, and the truth will stand. If you found meaning in this journey, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt her struggle as your own, or 2 if you think the fight for justice should have ended differently.